Green to Stay Eco Bounty News, the news with a tinge of mutiny, and we're looking at episode 22. And thank you for joining us. Before we start our full episode 22 of Bounty News, we'd like to say this video is brought to you by EcoOutbackTours.com. Eco Wonder from Down Under. Okay, there's a lot happening around the world today. Just going to give a brief summary of what our perspective is on things. It's a very interesting time, very precarious times for humanity. The geopolitical arrangement is shaping up, it's twisting, it's changing, it's looking for something different, which is what it should do with regard to the spirit of humanity. We should be always looking for ways to progress, to improve humanity's lot, and that's where I think we're at the moment. There's always been these two opposing forces throughout history, two opposing empires, two opposing ideologies. Is nothing new. It's goes back thousands of years. If you just look at the Bible has in the book of Daniel has a list of prophecies talking about the two kingdoms, the two empires, the two opposing forces throughout history. And well, today it's nothing new. We see the same thing. But what we want to do, being freedom fighters, progressive, people who care about the future of humanity, who care about the planet, care about wildlife, who care about things happening in our ecology. What we want to do is take some of this information and glean it and try to take points that we can use to progress our own personal development and, of course, the development of our fellow man. But we'll just touch on some of the things happening with regards to current events in the media. Okay, we've got 7 points that we want to bring out, and with regards to current events. And the first one we want to talk about is the French protests. The French protests are, internally to the French, it might seem that this is about pension reform, but I believe that the issue is much bigger. I believe that this issue is about opposing the status quo of the neoliberal austerity right-wing government agenda, which permeates in the West. Interesting. Now, why does the right-wing austerity neoliberal policies permeate in the West? Well, it's simple. Because the West has a aging population of wealth stakeholders. You just have to look in regards to what's happening here in Australia. So what I'm trying to say is the policies of the West governments will reflect strategies to protect that wealth of these aging populations. We're not talking about the battlers. There's battlers everywhere. There's people. There's average people. There's people who are in touch with reality throughout the West everywhere. And there's these other people in the West, wealthy stakeholders who have benefited from all the privatization and the capture of all the formerly publicly owned utilities and lands and ideas and infrastructure. A lot of the aging rich, a lot of them are Caucasian, but that doesn't have to come into it. Color doesn't have to come into it, but predominantly a lot of them are Caucasian heritage. They're in a battle now to hold on to the wealth, to hold on to finance strategies and business models that have been developed throughout their lifetime. I'm saying in the last 30 to 40 years. And that's what we're seeing played out now in the West. That's what it's all about. Now, what's happening in France is, and to another extent, it's actually happening in Peru as well. But incidentally, the Peru crises, which was attempted in Brazil, and of course it had a massive failure there, because we have a president in Brazil now who is very much in touch with the needs of his population, and he's instigating policies to try to work in harmony with that knowledge. Okay, this is a massive blow to the West, massive blow, what's happening in Brazil. It's being underestimated, like everything else. The French protests aren't even being reported in the mainstream media. I'm talking to dozens of people. They don't even know that there's been protests in France for the last 2 weeks. They're not even aware. This is because of a network of wealth stakeholders between government, between big business corporations, between shareholder interests, and the media. It's no mystery now. It's all out in the open. So we see in France, the youth of France are leading the charge, are leading the drive for change, even though they're not even going to. That proves it's not about pensions. That so many youth in France are involved in these protests is a sheer example that these protests aren't about pensions. It's about drawing a line and saying to the establishment, the wealthy stakeholder establishment, there's nothing more to give. Okay, and we see this is being played out everywhere. In the US, they are feeling threatened by that. It was okay when they were developing social media and dumping it all over the world. That was okay. It was okay with them. But when another country wants to do that, wants to develop a social media platform, they come up with all sorts of ways to attack it and to criminalize it. Okay, so this is fantastic, because it's waking up the populations to the fact that the West that claims to be free, claims to be liberal, claims to want open markets, is actually the exact opposite. They don't want free markets. They don't want open societies. They don't want free societies. It's all just a facade and a smokescreen, so that the average people who are oppressed by these neoliberal policies, that they're weighed down, they're bogged down. I know here in Australia, people are just bogged down by the system, and they're not interested. They don't have time to see the rug being pulled from underneath their feet. They don't even have time. They're not interested, or it might be issues that they're worried about their kids, with their kids' education, and all the list of things that are happening. Inflation. So Australia isn't really somewhere that instigates social change, because they have been so blindsided, so dumbed down by the media, by the two-wing politics, which is nearly like one party. They're nearly like one party, that they don't even seem to have their minds on it. It's got a lot of other reasons too. A lot of the people population in Australia came from parts of the world where they didn't have financial opportunities. They've come here solely in the sole belief to create economic financial wealth. Okay, that's a lot of the mentality in the country. Okay, a lot of the people that have come to Australia had been oppressed by by economic circumstances or education or whatever, and they've come here solely to improve that, and they're focusing on the financial part of their development. And that's what Australia has. It's nothing really new. Australia's had that for a long time. But back to the topic, French protests. The fact that a lot of youth are involved is tantamount to prove that it's not really about pensions. It's about them. It's quite dangerous actually for the West, because the West have heaped so much debt onto the youth in the way of education, by way of housing, by way of inflation, that now the youth look ahead and they think, well, there's just no point. There's no point, and they're leaving them nothing to lose. And this is very dangerous for the West, because this is what has instigated most of the revolutions and rebellions in the West to begin with, that they leave the youth and the middle class and the general mass of the population with nothing to lose. Okay, what else we want to talk about? AUKUS. I'm not really going to talk about AUKUS much. It was just a complete betrayal of Australian sovereignty. It was set up by the former government and right-wing think tanks that are interested in maintaining foreign Western interest in the country that's out there. And any other kind of patriotic or defence argument is just a load of garbage, because anyone who knows about defence would know that these particular products will be obsolete by the time they get here. And anyway, if you look at conventional warfare of the history of the West, it's been much of a failure as far as the only person that has benefited from these types of defence or security arrangements is the military arms complex. And what happened with this government? They were blindsided. But actually, I was starting to feel sorry for the new government here in Australia. But to be honest, they had this mentality that if we just get in government, we'll be able to bring about change. It doesn't work like that. You have to fight continually. You have to have an argument. You have to have a narrative. You have to have a convincing narrative. But most importantly with politics, you have to be in touch with the people. And I've even had union representatives say to me, well, this particular government now has just gone way too far right. And to prove that, now the media monopoly here in Australia, which has always traditionally been against Labor, is now welcoming their policies, and that is a sure indication that there is no opposition, there is no opposing forces in Australia. There's no opposing argument, no opposing debate. They're pretty much on the same page, which is, look, all we have to do is sell raw resources, and they've set up our economy. They've basically sabotaged the next generations by doing so much business gymnastics for the four banks. They've done so much banking gymnastics now for the four banking cartel, if you want to call it there, that they've rigged our economy, and this has had a really detrimental effect. There's just the cost of having a roof on your head now in Australia is so expensive. There's no room for anything else. There's no room for small business. There's no money for small business. There's not going to be any money for a serious climate innovation strategy. Because that's going to require risk, and it's going to require the government to fight not only the corrupt fossil fuel industry, the corrupt, lying fossil fuel industry, but also the military arms. They're in cahoots, these types of Western industries. They're in cahoots. So any kind of opposition, any kind of resistance now by the mass is needed. What it's going to take to do that? Well, we saw a little bit during the COVID mandates where people were pushed and oppressed, and they came out and protested. But to be frank, as much as I don't want to discourage that, that was good to see, because we can see now that these so-called remedies for the so-called disease, or whatever you want to call it, was a complete failure, and the media has completely shied away from that topic now. That just shows how weak and how disenfranchised they are from the average person's life. The effects of the so-called remedy, just how disconnected they are, because they don't even mention it now. What is it going to take to wake up people? Well, it'll probably take some massive oppressive policy, which they won't. They're probably trying to, as you can see with various digital policies, they'll try to bring them in slowly. But at least there is some voice of opposition now in Australia, because there wasn't 6 years ago.